All right, now we're getting somewhere. Welcome to the October development retrospective slash status update. I have a lot to share with you, some pretty exciting stuff I'm excited to demo today. Um, I'm also going to talk a little bit about where we stand with the schedule. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to go over, so let's just jump right into it. All right, so let's begin by creating a somewhat interesting shape to work with. So I'm just going to create a pretty simple starting gear shape, kind of like a teardrop. All right, so let's add a mating pitch curve here. Looks like that. All right, so there are so many different ways we can actually parameterize our gears, but I'm going to go with all of the defaults for starters. Beautiful. So something that you can do that I'm very proud of is you can actually visualize the contact points between the gears. And if you zoom in, you can actually see, let me pause it real quick, that these contact points are very, very precise. You zoom in, they still look good. Those contacts possess a very specific property. Some of you will already know what that property is, but I'm not going to go into that this video, but suffice it to say that they are behaving exactly as intended, and it gives you the benefit of the involute, the whole reason that you want that tooth form. It's cool, you can see the contacts kind of swapping from one end to the other, and they kind of trade places as they move along. All right, so let's do another type of gear. Let's add a rack and pinion pitch curve to this. Let me remove this one. And I'll again go with the default settings. And you can see that this one works just fine as well. Let's now go to previous step and let's create an internal gear for this to roll with. I'll say Gearify again. Now there's one modification I need to make. By default, this is treated as an external gear, which means that these undercut fillet curves appear on the interior side. But if I want this to be an internal gear, in which case this guy is rolling along the inside, that we want to reverse it. So all I do is for that gear, I hit this toggle to go from an external gear to an internal gear, and you can see that those fillet curves have now flipped. And let me go back over here, and you can see that those are rolling together very nicely. So each gear can be treated as either an internal or external gear depending on how you pair them up. And I have to say I am really quite pleased with how accurate and how fast the calculations are. They are extremely precise. And I just get really excited just watching these contacts because everything is just behaving so accurately and the calculation is so quick. So that's a very big win. Okay, now let's talk about parameterizations a little bit. So here I've modified the gear a little bit and the number of teeth to create a gear that has some problems. In particular, I want you to watch this tooth area here, and I'm going to roll it forward a little bit. There. So you see some clear self-intersection of the teeth. Now, first of all, at some point, I'll add tooling to make the detection of these scenarios a lot easier, where you won't have to kind of be hawk-eyed and watching this thing very carefully. But at the moment, don't have that there, so we just have to kind of look for it. So how do we handle this? Well, one of the easiest solutions would be just to increase the tooth count. But you don't always want all the tooth sizes to have to sink down to the lowest common denominator to handle these scenarios. And that's where the tooth distribution variation curve comes into play. So I'm going to double click to select one of my gears, and I'm going to set up some tooth variation. So right here, I'm going to place a control point. Let me hide the other gear so you can see things a little bit better. Select that control point, and I'm going to shrink this down. You see that variation curve. We'll hide the gear real quick. Goes from this thickness, thinner, and then thicker again. I'm going to say Gearify again after modifying that curve. And now you see we actually have a transition from larger tooth spacing to smaller tooth spacing so that we have smaller teeth in that region. Since I want finer teeth in that area, I'm going to toss in a few extra teeth in that region there. All right, let's bring back that other gear. And now we ought to see a better situation. Let me show those contacts again. And now we have a much better behaved gear. And we did that by only adding just, I think, 4 more teeth, because we can have this size variation in the tooth spacing. Okay, so here's another parameter we might want to adjust. Notice that the undercut fillet curve in this instance is not quite as far back as we would want it to be. But that's all right, we can adjust that too, and we can adjust that also as a curve. So I'm going to go down to undercut proportion. And I'll explain these parameters in more detail in some other video. But what I'm going to do here is add a control point, and I actually want to expand this guy. Increase it and say Gearify. Cool. That was maybe a little overzealous. Let's back it up a little bit. Maybe I can get away with a little bit smaller. Nice. And notice that the variation was not changed over here because this curve is a continuum. And it'll smoothly transition those undercut distances from what I set it here all the way back to here. This is one of the parameterizations. So now let's rotate again, and let's just watch it and see how it behaves. Looking pretty good on this end. Question is, do I need to do it on the other end? Do I need to adjust these undercuts? They're perhaps larger than they need to be in some instances. I think I saw an area where it was a little bit close. See there? That's a little bit too close. So, all right. So let me go select this gear, and let's say add a control point here. I'm just going to add a little extra space here. And you can see I added more room there. And that's, you get the idea. I hope that you would basically just kind of tweak things until you have them where you want things to be. But you can adjust these parameters along the length of the curve, and you can adjust them continuously rather than having to figure out a one-size-fits-all situation. There we go. That was another. Go over to this guy. That undercut was too close. I'm still on undercut proportion. Let's increase that. Good. Okay, that looks better. I think everything's behaving all right there. Let's look at the contacts again. Very nice. All right, the last thing I want to demo is the pressure angle variation curve. So in this gear assembly, I have uniformly 20-degree pressure angle. at all points. But what if we wanted to change that? So what I can go and do is I can select this gear, select the pressure angle, and what I'm going to do is start off at a pressure angle of 20 degrees, but I'm going to transition to a pressure angle of around 35 degrees. So I'm adjusting this variation curve here, set it to around 35. Let me hide that other gear just to make things a bit cleaner. Say Gearify, and now we have a transition from 25 smoothly. You can even see the value here, the sample value changing as I move across from 20 to 35 and back to 20. And if I make the other gear appear, you can see that they roll and mesh together just fine. In some cases that can help you avoid self-intersection. Some cases it may be desirable for whatever reason you need it, but it's cool to have that ability to make that variation. Okay, and a final detail for the pressure angle variation is that it's also possible to control delta of the pressure angle even for each tooth flank. So in the typical scenario, if you have a involute tooth that's on a straight surface pitch curve, such as like a rack gear, then the tooth profiles form a straight line. But I can actually vary the pressure angle even during the engagement of those teeth. Add an increase in the angle, positive delta 35, negative delta 35. What that means, not too important right now, but what this is creating is an actual continuum of the pressure angle along each tooth flank. It's no longer a straight flank, even though it's on a straight pitch curve segment. So if I turn on the other gear, contacts, rotate, you can see not too much engagement at that on those gears, but you could address the other parameters to try to get things to behave better, have more simultaneous points of contact, and so on. Anyway, that was a lot to demo, but hopefully that makes some sense. I will take some time later to explain the parameterizations. The UI is not finished yet, so some things may look different in their final form, but I'm just trying to demonstrate the amount of control that you have. All right, so where does that leave us in terms of schedule? So I've been pushing really hard to get some kind of beta release published. In terms of what raw capability I need from the software, I am now actually weeks away from having everything you'd need to make gears. I mean, you saw it, it's already pretty capable. However, deployment is another stage of the process. I need to stand up a server. I also need to handle my logins and handle my payments for the subscriptions, and there's a bit to do there that's somewhat complex, and that sort of thing is also not necessarily my bread and butter. So it's going to take me a little time to figure that out. But I am striving for potentially having some sort of an alpha release, which case I would hand it out to a few kind of hand-picked people to test it out and see how it holds up, get a little bit of mileage on it, and then see how it goes from there. So I would say a few more weeks before having the raw capability, and then I move on to deployment. How long will that take? I don't know. Maybe a few weeks, maybe a couple months, we'll see. But I will continue to post updates, give you the month-by-month report, and hopefully I'll have something in your hands soon. But we're farther now than we've ever been before, closer than any time in the past. So just bear with me, and we'll get there soon. So I hope you've enjoyed this update. I'll be in touch.